The investment that the NIH makes is a terrific investment in our economy locally. The growth of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus is very much linked to the vibrant success that scientists on this campus have had in gaining NIH grants, and to the extent that those grants are not funded or the funding is slowed, the economic development will slow as well, and that's not a good thing for our region or the country. I know you all have recently seen the press where the economists are arguing about whether the sequestration has already had an effect on economic growth. Some say yes, some say it's too early. I can tell you unequivocally that sequestration has had an effect on scientific growth at Roswell Park, because we are already planning for reduced NIH funding, and our scientists are having to narrow the bounds of their research that is targeted at improving lives, finding cures, and coincidentally generates jobs. So it's a critical time. I really appreciate you all joining us here today to learn more about this issue. And we have several other individuals, great scientists and supporters of science. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Ned Lapman, CEO of the Hauptmann Woodward Institute, for his comments. Dr. Lapman?
Building a health research system is not like building the interstate highway system. Once the capital outlay for roadways is finished, expenses decrease because maintenance is a lot cheaper than de novo construction. And we can live with potholes, and in fact we do. In health-related research, we are always in construction mode, setting out in new directions with brand new ideas, technologies, and equipment. A system like this desperately needs long-term commitment and consistency. We cannot afford bridges to nowhere. The damage being done by sequestration is only the most recent in a long series of damaging ups and downs that have created wounds and caused great inefficiency in the nation's research efforts. Perhaps the most damaging effect of all has been on the potential next generation of scientists, our students and young researchers who see career uncertainties, straitened circumstances, and limited horizons. We are making sure that they will not be there when we need them. What happened? Congress doubled the budget for NIH in the period of 1997 to 2004. It did so to help realize the promise of new cancer therapies, to push back resurgent infectious diseases, and to combat many other health problems. In response to this new federal mandate, institutions invested their own resources in new research facilities and expanded training programs, and in creating all the varied resources necessary to use the new funding wisely and effectively. Our younger generation has seen a dramatic retreat from the promise of this heady period. Since 2004, the NIH budget has hit a brick wall and has significantly declined in real terms compared with inflation. This has had profound consequences. In 1997, the success rate for NIH research project grants was about 31%. In 2012, that number was cut almost in half to 17%. In 1997, there were about 7,400 new grants awarded, and in 2012, there were about 9,100, only 25% more. It's a long way from the doubling that you might have anticipated. But the number of applicants for grants has more than doubled. This boom and bust funding cycle was recently pumped again by the short-lived ARRA supplements, which started a whole bunch of new projects that there was no money to finish. So imagine the point of view of young scientists who are contemplating up to 10 years of training post-college. They see mentors and advisors grimly persisting when the tap of research support is repeatedly turned off and on. They see layoffs and contractions in their own institutions. They see great anxiety and profound inefficiencies. Why should they commit years of training and hard work for such a precarious career prospect? The situation is nearly as discouraging for the institutions in which they would work. That's us. Research programs are slowed, new ones are deferred. cost of research rise, since much more support has to be provided for bridge funding between grants. All the while, the influx of new talent and energy that is the lifeblood of research is shutting down. So, generous funding is important. Consistency of funding is absolutely critical. Thank you.
At the CTRC, UB's physician scientists conduct research upstairs and see patients downstairs and participate with the clinicians at Kaleida in the Gates Vascular Institute. This unique facility was designed to maximize the kind of collaboration and innovation that leads to medical breakthroughs by housing top-notch physician scientists, including several newly recruited scientists to Buffalo, who've chosen to work at UB and continue this momentum on the Buffalo-Niagara Medical Campus. These researchers are conducting research on and treatments on chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, ear infections in children, liver disease, stroke, and many others. But research support for these devastating, costly diseases depends on federal funding, the single most important driver of the development of new drugs, new preventions, and better and cheaper health care. Over the past 5 years, research expenditures at UB have averaged $350 million a year, and a significant fraction of this is from the National Institutes of Health for biomedical research. Sequestration will have a devastating effect on biomedical research at UB and at institutions throughout the country. Projects on the development of new drugs and new preventions and healthcare improvements will slow down and stop altogether, some of them. Jobs, as Dr. Trump pointed out, will also be affected. Every research award to UB supports up to 7 or 8 additional jobs. So these are jobs in Buffalo that will be in jeopardy as a result of sequestration and these budget cuts. The cuts will have the harshest effect on young researchers, Dr. Lappman pointed out. Cuts in research funding will drive our students and trainees out of careers in biomedical research. The country can lose a whole generation of researchers in the next 5 to 10 years. And once the research infrastructure is lost, it'll take decades to rebuild this infrastructure, even if funding is restored. Ironically and tragically, as sequestration seeks to cut costs, the net effect of this action is costly beyond imagination. By slowing or halting progress in studying costly diseases like Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases as examples, the lack of advances in developing effective treatments for these diseases will cost the country billions of dollars in the coming decades. This cost is simply too high, and I urge our representatives not to cut research funding that is a fundamental basis for the global advancement of human health and welfare. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to introduce Congressman Brian Higgins.
Well, because there's really not an eloquent or refined way of saying this, let me just throw it out there. The United States Congress has failed you. The United States Congress has failed to meet its obligation to the American people. And sequestration is a word that originates out of Washington. But what it really means is failure. Failure to meet its obligations to our society. And there's no more fitting place to talk about the dire consequence of sequestration than right here at Roswell Park Cancer Institute and in Buffalo, New York. It was right here in Buffalo that gave the nation and the world cancer research. It was happening right here. The predecessor of Roswell Park Cancer Institute was the New York State Cancer Laboratory. In the late 19th century, the publisher of the Buffalo Evening News and Roswell Park, the physician, went to Albany to make the argument the government has a responsibility to finance cancer research. It's the first historical record when the New York State Legislature granted funding to the predecessor of Roswell Park Cancer Institute for cancer research. It was in 1904 at Roswell Park and its predecessor that gave the nation, the world, chemochemical therapy, which was very, very important. It's groundbreaking studies right here at Roswell Park Cancer Institute that found the link between smoking and generally tobacco use and cancer. 1 in 2 men will develop invasive cancer in their lifetime, 1 in 3 women. Why more for men? Because men smoke more. In 1971, a Republican president, Richard Nixon, signed the National Cancer Act, also known as the War on Cancer, 1971. People will say, well, not a lot of progress was made because of that effort. Yes, there was. Yes, there was. In 1971, between 40 and 45% of those who were diagnosed with cancer lived beyond 5 years of their diagnosis. Today, because of targeted therapies, hundreds of them, they're designed to target gene mutations. The survival rate has increased to 68% for adults and over 80% for kids. But here's what you know about cancer research. You can't stop and start. The only failure in cancer research is when you quit, or you're forced to quit because of lack of government funding. The cost of cancer is profound. Medical costs alone are in the $90 billion range. Lost productivity is in the $150 billion each and every year alone. We make progress when we insist on a robust commitment to cancer funding over the longer term. New therapies are being developed every single day. Vaccines, not only for prevention, but as therapy to boost the body's immune system to more effectively fight cancer. Gene-influenced therapies are being developed right here every single day to increase life expectancy and also life quality. What's going on in Washington today is a travesty. It's a travesty. I used to be a teacher of history and economics. The only way you can grow an economy is to invest in it. Infrastructure, education, and scientific research. That is our history. That is our history as a nation, and we find that when we make public investments into research, they manifest themselves later on in new job creation and development, in rebuilding cities like this city right here in Buffalo in Western New York. The growth of downtown Buffalo and the growth of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus are not coincidental. One is a direct result of the other. The growth of Roswell and the other anchor institutions and all the public and private companies that make up the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus are creating a residential demand in downtown Buffalo, which is creating a commercial demand. That's why all these buildings that historically were dead have new life in them. There's a dynamic new economy growing up out of the life sciences right here in Buffalo and Western New York. You take what's happened here and what could happen here, and you multiply that throughout the nation, it's a whole new ballgame. America begins to resume its role as a leader in economic development, scientific research, and in particular, cancer research. So what does sequestration mean? It means that if you're diagnosed at Roswell Park Cancer Institute with late-stage cancer, you don't have the luxury of time. While more people are living with cancer than are dying from cancer, those who are living with cancer aren't cured. They're just waiting for the next promising therapy to come along in a clinical trial so that they can extend their life and extend the quality of their lives. All of us know somebody who is afflicted with cancer. We have an obligation as a nation to do much, much better. You can't let Congress off the hook. This is why people hate Congress. And their disdain is justified. A recent poll had Congress, head lice was more popular than Congress. You can't make this up. But I was telling Dr. Trump, I had an opportunity to spend time with Dr. Harold Varmus. He heads the National Cancer Institute in Washington, used to be head of the National Institutes of Health. And I think the major point in our discussion, after several hours, was that the cancer community, all of you who are involved with this, we have to find a more effective way to communicate the importance of cancer research to the general community. We've got to find a way to do that. Because I'm convinced that if we make a robust commitment of funding behind cancer research, we may never cure cancer. It's not, the more research is done, the more complicated it becomes. It's not one disease, it's hundreds and potentially thousands. But the new information that we're gleaning from the most recent research gives us the opportunity to more effectively treat cancer, extending life and extending life quality. This is an urgent call, an urgent reminder that all of you, despite the extraordinary work that you do and the research that you're conducting and the promising results that gives us potentially, you have to go a little bit further. You have to help everybody understand in the lay community what's at stake here. You know, one of the things that was so compelling to me, I read a research paper that said that less than 10% of cancer deaths are attributed to the original tumor. It's when cancer advances, when it grows, when it metastasizes to an organ that you can't live without. That's when cancer becomes lethal. That's why early detection is important. That's why these targeted therapies are important, to stop cancer before it becomes deadly. As all of the previous speakers have said, and all of you know much better than I ever will, major progress has been made, but we still have a long way to go. Don't let Congress off the hook. Don't let them off the hook. And I will do everything I can to continue to advocate for cancer research, not only because it's good for the nation, it's good for those who are afflicted, those who love the afflicted, but also it's good for this economy right here in Buffalo and Western New York. Thank you very, very much for your commitment. This fight is only beginning.